Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Ask Me Anything, PaaS Best Practices. So let's get started by quickly introducing our speakers for today. First, we have Roy Ellis, and then second, Chad Thompson. Roy started in Progress over 30 years ago in tech support. He spent over 20 years in development helping to deliver products like AppServer and WebSpeed, OpenEdge management, and most recently, Progress Application Server for OpenEdge. Roy has been the director of Managed Database Services team for the past 2 years. Chad Thompson is a senior principal consultant with Progress Services. With over 20 years of industry experience favoring reality over formality, this passionate technology advocate has experience and insight that shed light and produce the aha effect on some of the darkest corners of application integration. As for me, I'm Joelle Andrews, a senior product marketing manager here at Progress. I'll be today's MC, and I'm keeping our presenters on time and on track. So let's get started. We're here to talk about the Progress Application Server for OpenEdge. You may have heard it called PaaS for OpenEdge or PaaS-OE, but we've got two sections we'd like to discuss today. The first is some important things you'll need to know about PaaS, and the second is best practices. So let's begin with the things you need to know. Chad, Roy, say hello.
Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Chad. I definitely got to change my my synopsis there to something more like yours.
Aha.
Getting somebody to write me something better than Roy worked and worked and worked and now he's here. So, okay, so I want to thank everyone for coming. And we sort of have a free form here today, right? Chad and I are here to answer questions. But we do have some things we'll chat about, and as question comes in, we'll answer them when they make sense, or we'll answer them as soon as we get them. Right now, we just want to set up a background, make sure people are all on the same page. So we'll just start talking. When you get tired of us, ask a question, or we'll just keep talking. So what we always find, and this is a good setup to make sure we're all on the same page, is PaaS-OE is not your classic app server or WebSpeed, right? And that's where many of the problems come in. People move from classic app server or WebSpeed. We figure that's why you're here. You had those before. And they move to PaaS-OE and it's just the same thing, only it's a different version, right? It isn't. It is very different. And it's because of the technology that was used in it, right? The old classic app server could not be updated and could not be used in the cloud and had so many problems that it was better just to basically start over. And how we started over was with by putting it in something called Tomcat, right? And Tomcat is what, Chad?
Well, you could discuss that in a lot of ways, but Java servlet execution engine, right? It's a container for running Java things, and it's one of the things that a lot of people really understand is that it acts as a web server. There's a plugin, one class that makes it understand HTTP. So you could say in some circles, it's just a web server. And for our purposes, that's how it's applied. But we are also using it to run a lot of our Java components in it. So it's a nice trade-off.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the biggest point here is, right, we used to have TCP, we connect to the app server. We used to do a lot of things that way. Now it's HTTP, or hopefully HTTPS, right? Now, people should not be running HTTP. They should be running HTTPS if they can. So that makes a bunch of issues. Customers expect things to disconnect or stay connected and those types of things. But because it's a Tomcat web server, it doesn't work that way anymore, right?
That's right. And it's an interesting trade-off where classic app server, when clients would connect, they would hold that connection persistently effectively, or it would be kept alive. Now that we're in the HTTP communication world, as everybody knows, when you connect or issue a request to an HTTP web server like Tomcat, that request or that connection is only alive for as long as the request is ongoing. Sure, there's ways to make it a little more stateful. HTTP 1.1 and better can have a continue style communication where you can hold a socket open. But from a traditional point of view, and comparing it to how Classic AppServer used to work, there's no such thing as holding a connection open any longer. The actual data that goes across the wire between the client and the app server is only there. That communication only exists for the length of time of the request. So that's an important aspect.
Right. And if we're moving along, I have anything else to say about the Tomcat? I think we covered that.
One of the things that I do want to bring up about Tomcat in specific is it is indeed Tomcat, right? That we're hosting our platform on. And historically, if you had a problem or had some issue that you wanted to figure out about the Classic AppServer or Classic WebSpeed, you would have to go to the OpenEdge knowledge base or the OE Hive or any of these other websites. But if you had specific issues and tried to use a web search to find an answer, they'd be very, very, very short. Why is my web speed not working? Okay, I'd probably get 5 or 10 hits if I was lucky. These days, because it's based, or because PAS is based on Tomcat, if you feel that you're having a Tomcat related issue or a Java related issue, your web searches are now relevant. The things that you can see inside of the Tomcat documentation and the Tomcat results list from a web search are applicable to your PAS space. For example, things like logging configuration, or how do I scale to a certain degree? How do I set up different different Tomcat aspects like shared or single sign-on cookies, things like that. But that's all applicable. However, that notwithstanding, it's important to note that we use Tomcat as a platform to host our application. Just because it is Tomcat and the results that you read and hear and that it all is applicable, it's purpose built for our reasons, for our app server deployment. So don't get carried away and start plugging in all kinds of different Tomcat apps into your PAS web server. Try to resist that urge. And the only other point I would make, Roy, is even though it is a web server, right, it's communicating over HTTP, don't expose it out to the internet and treat it like a web server. Treat it like your classic broker.
And we'll get more into that later, right? So,
right.
Yep. The other large thing I want to say that's very different, well, there's a couple other ones, but the other one is that now we use a multi-session agent, right? It used to be back in the WebSpeed and app server days, there was an agent for every request. And you could lock that agent up session memory. You could use, an agent can handle several requests, although single threaded. Now we have a multi-session agent, which means one agent is handling a lot of requests at the same time. So instead of having one agent that's handling one request, you can have an agent handling hundreds of requests, right? So, again, that makes it, you have to change your thinking about how you work, right? So the old Classic AppServer, there's Joel. The old Classic AppServer was, if you had a problem with an agent, you were likely to kill that agent, right? So,
right, you would just trim it or kill it away.
Kill it or trim it. And if you do that now, what happens with the 100 connections instead of one connection, right? So all of a sudden.
Yeah, the two main points to where you're headed, I believe, right? Number one is that it used to be individual requests would run on individual agents. Now all the concurrent requests are within the multi-threaded or multi-session agent. And if I made a decision to, oh gosh, I have to get rid of that agent for some reason, remember that it's not just one request, it's every ongoing concurrent request if I drop that agent. That's a very significant consideration now over Classic. And the other point, Roy, is with a lot of clients that I do work with, the Classic AppServer versus PAS multi-session agents, where if you ran code, and let's just say you weren't the most diligent in cleaning up, say, mem pointers or things like that, you would see the agent session would bloat a little bit, and it would incrementally increase the memory usage of each individual agent. Well, now with multi-session agent or multi-threaded, how you want to look at it, all those sessions are now inside of one executable. So it will look like PaaS has a massive memory leak. I can't believe the memory it's consuming. Well, it's really just because all of your ABL sessions are now rolled into one executable. They're all executing inside of that one multi-session agent. So it's going to look like it increases memory consumption.
Right. And while we're here, I'm going to say this: don't kill your agent. Right. There are ways to remove your agent and move your agent on. Right. You can stop it and you can add a new agent. So don't. Again, it's not the classic app server. You used to kill the agents or stop the agents, but many people just did a kill -9 or whatever, ended it on Windows, whatever. Don't do that anymore, right? There are ways you can ask that agent to shut down, to trim your system memory back, and you can add another one, and nobody will be the wiser. So start getting in that mindset. If you need information, we'll send you a link afterwards on how to do this. But again, the old way of just, oh, I have a bad agent, I'm an agent just behaving badly, I'll just kill it and another one will spawn up, right? So
Right.
again, something different you have to think about when you're using
And a
PaaS
very
versus
common case out there, Roy, a very common case is, I've seen it very often, is that customers would see this type of issue in Classic and they would say, you know what, let's just start a scheduled job. So periodically throughout the day, we monitor how much RAM our agents are using and just automatically trim them. Again, that's a legacy solution to an advanced modern problem. We don't want to apply it to PaaS. So we want to resist the urge to trim the agents, to kill agents. However, your stronger phrasing might be more advisable. Just don't do it. At the end of the day, if memory is bloating at the agent level, inside the session level, number one is the growth that you see is the growth of your application. So if I start off a PaaS agent and it starts at a certain amount of memory, great. As I run the application, it might increase slightly over time, no problem. But if I start to see that growth hockey stick a little bit, where it's growing exponentially or to a problem value, what is a problem value? What is an extreme range of memory? That all depends on your application. But I think we can all agree.
your system, right?
Right. I think we can all agree that if that memory growth is unexpected, there really isn't a problem with PaaS. I'm sorry to say, you need to look at your code.
And there are
Right,
ways
guys.
to do that. We can help you with that.
Right.
So do you think that covers the important things you wanted to let people know about to kind of set the stage for this? Any other
Yeah, I think so.
important
I do
moments?
see I do see a question here. If you don't mind me bringing it up, because
Sure.
it's
Yeah, questions are already coming in. So folks,
all
if you
right.
have
So,
them, let us know.
I mean, this one's set up right now for what we're talking about, right? The
Great.
question is it possible to configure pooled connections to transfer to the new agent in case an agent crash or death instead of losing them all? Okay. No. Agents do not share information. However, if you have to stop an agent and you use our tools to stop an agent, what it will do is it'll say, hey, no more requests to this agent. It'll tell the broker, right? The Java portion that lets everything goes into, and it'll say no more for this agent, no more for these ABL sessions, and it'll send it to your new agent, right? That's just sitting there waiting to do things.
Yeah.
Then you can tell it, go ahead and drain these requests off, right? So someone's in the middle of a request, I'm not going to cancel them. They're going to finish their request. And then, as those threads go down and they complete, then we're going to shut that agent down.
Right.
There's another command that says, hey, if after 10 minutes, pick a number, after 10 minutes, you get to decide, it still hasn't cleaned up, then we will end those requests so that you get that agent to shut down. Because if you want to shut it down, there's a reason. Let's shut it down. So
And-
that's a great question, which fit right in here. Go ahead, Chad.
Perfect.
Right. And the idea of pooled connections, or I think the idea here is if I did have to trim or decide to take out one of the agents, I would start a second one. But help me out here, Roy. I don't believe there's any concept of if I had persistent information on that first agent, all those sessions inside of there, will that persistent information be available inside that second agent? Remember, when you destroy that agent, you're destroying its sessions, and you won't be able to carry over that state. So the migration from one agent to another is a very less state-free mindset.
Can you go back a moment because there's actually two people asking if you have a preferred Java version or supplier?
Nope, only the ones that the compatibility guide said we support.
Right. The version
So,
and version, I think for version 12, I think we start at, is it 17 or is it 11? Right. I think it's 17.
17 for version
Yeah.
12. Yep.
JDK 17, whoever you like. I find Adoptium is pretty popular. For me, I like ones with a lot of exposure. So I find myself grabbing, is it Corretto? Is Amazon's JDK? Is it Corretto? Anyway, Amazon's JDK, the
I'm
one
going
that
to
they would
defer to
host.
you.
Yeah, in the cloud, right? The one that they use. Well, I'm going to guess that that probably gets a lot of exposure, and it's probably good that it runs in their cloud and their EC2 instances. So if I trust it for my environment, I feel relatively safe. Plus, there's more than likely a plentiful documents and tech support, and I know who to call if Amazon Java is having an issue.
That's the biggest thing, having support for it. So
Great. Okay. Well, there are so many questions that came in. Some of them are about this, some of them are in other directions. I know we wanted to get to the best practices topic.
Ooh,
So is it okay if I move us along to that?
I think so, right? Yeah.
All
I
right.
think so. We've talked about everything, haven't we? Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah, I think you
And
covered
of course,
everything
if we
on that
haven't,
last one.
and if we haven't,
Questions will let
We
you
will.
know.
We got time.
yep, exactly.
All right.
Um,
So tell us about
so
some best practices.
well, and I'm going to leave this one. Should we come back to security so we get through the rest there? Dad, what do you think? Because that might
Well,
be a while.
there's some easy things, right? Easy things about security. So I'd like to just touch on it just briefly, right? And we can always circle back and also take some of these other questions if they relate to other
Mhm.
topics. But as far as security goes, number one is in this day and age, nobody wants to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or wherever saying that company X forgot to change the password. So at bare minimum, up front, stop using when you'll hear Roy all the time, right? Don't use the default settings. Well, that includes passwords. So what's the password if I wanted to be the super user inside of a Tomcat web server? Well, Tomcat and Tomcat. Uh, Everybody on the planet knows that. So
Yep.
be sure to change it. So that's an easy one. Of course, our platform, we didn't mention it earlier, but Tomcat plus the engineers chose best of breed security modeling layer, and that is Spring Framework. So remember that everything that relates to Tomcat is applicable, but everything that relates to Spring is applicable. Now, we went out of our way to make it configurable, so it's easy in there. However, you need to be mindful to get in there and twist those dials, twist those switches. So do that first. One of the things that I see common is we'll do that when we get to production. No, you need to do it now. Do it first. Don't wait before you go live and you send it off, your package off to production and light that candle to find out that, oh, I forgot to turn on security, or now that security's on, I can't access that page.
And
Lastly,
Chad,
yeah,
sorry, what about the admin username?
the
Any,
admin username.
any
Well,
precautions around that?
Well, as far as the admin username, right? When I talk about Tomcat admin username, the user is typically Tomcat. Switch it to something else, right? Admin or TC admin, something like that. But make the password something else. Now, it gets stored in plain text on disk. If that's a concern where you're not protecting the operating system or ingress to it or access to it, fine. You can actually plug in encrypted passwords on disk for Tomcat. So now you're more protected. And I think the last thing I'll mention is in most documentation and most training scenarios, what you're going to see is HTTPS, TLS, SSL. They're the same thing. But you'll see them as appendices or buried in some chapter saying, by the way, do this. Make sure you're running HTTPS. The vast majority of the time during PaaS implementation, what I see is that customers go, we will turn that on when we go to prod. We don't need it at development time. and for any reason, leaving it until you go to production is probably going to leave you with a lot of pain. Do it up front. And the last thing I'll say here is the 99% case of TLS is not security. It doesn't make your app any more secure. It makes the communication private, which is highly important. And yes, before anybody asks, yes, on your internal network. You should be HTTPS or SSL or TLS, your word, everywhere.
Great. So time is ticking here. It's amazing how fast this is going. Can I have you leave the very important topic of security and move on to the others?
Roy, would you like
a lot of these are, yeah, I'll take the monitoring and test, at least give it a shot.
Perfect.
Monitoring is very important to me. Well, because I heard complaints when I was in development that the Classic AppServer and Classic WebSuite didn't have any real monitoring. Oh, it just tells me if it's up and running and how many requests it got. We have added JMX, which Tomcat uses. So we added it in, and it gets so much information for you. The biggest problem is learning what you want to monitor. But there are several different ways of monitors. There's ways of doing it securely. There are ways of doing it remotely. There are ways of doing it for your whole system. And if you're don't have monitoring on, let's take the time to talk about monitoring and how you turn it on and how you do it. Because if you're not monitoring, one, you're going to be surprised, and two, you may not notice you have like a memory leak. So turn monitoring on and then test. Did I say test enough yet, Chad? Test.
And do it early. Do it early. Do it often. Test your monitoring. Do it at development time. Do it as before you get out to production, so you know what metrics you're looking for and you know what metrics to expect. Do you think that exporting logs to disk and maybe grepping through those or FTPing them to another system or something like that, Roy, is that monitoring enough? Logs?
No, I logs. Yes, you should be looking at logs and you should be having those monitoring. I'm thinking of the interactive monitoring first. Logs are great. People need to understand the logs. People need to understand the new request ID in the logs. That's part of troubleshooting, but also monitoring is part of troubleshooting. So that's my soapbox. Your soapbox is going to be security. My soapbox is going to be monitor, test. So
that is a good
we have a
segue
couple.
Troubleshooting.
Yes. So I don't think there's much more to say about troubleshooting, except maybe the health scanner gives you a holistic issue, a holistic look at your system, not just your PAS-OE. So if you're having memory issues or you're having CPU issues, that's the thing you want to try. Again, we can send you information on that. There's been a talk about that. But again, I think it's something you need to do. I see a whole bunch of questions coming in. We can cover some of them with the rest of these items. So you just want to start going through the questions? How does that sound? Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Okay, so this one came in right off the bat. James says, my app server code has a lot of commands like OS command, etc. I understand these can be very poorly performant due to forking. It's not practical to fix all of them immediately. Is there anything I can do to mitigate this risk in the interim? That is a well thought out question.
Right.
James, thanks for coming. And I'll let Chad verify this when I'm done here, but the best thing and this is probably my fault, I always say run as many ABL sessions on an agent as you can until you find out there's a reason you can't. This is a reason you can't, right? Too many of OS commands and those types of forking on one agent can become a bottleneck. So in this case, I would say more agents and less ABL sessions per is your answer to mitigate this until you can get all those fixed. Right. Anything you want to add to that, Chad?
Yeah, I do. There's a little more color we can put onto that. If your choice is I can't change any code at all, then okay. Having a lot of what the goal is to have as many sessions per agent as you can, and having one agent. However, your operating system is going to tell you when you can't put any more sessions on that agent. All right, that's my indication to spin up a second agent. But in the case of this, with the OS command, it rears its head in two ways. Number one is when there's a lot of memory being consumed by that individual agent thread. When an OS command execution is performed, that's when that overhead of OS command is realized. And on a single per user basis, if you had serialized requests, you would never see the problem. But if you run large volume of users, large volume of concurrent requests to your agent, that's when the OS command thread tie-up, if you will, that's when it starts to show itself, because one user will be waiting for another user's executor thread, right? Will be waiting for the other one to complete before it can even start. So it becomes a resource contention issue, if you will. So what you would end up doing, how can I fix it in the interim? There is no good solution, really, but some things that we've seen, we say try to run one agent. However, if my issue is contention of resources on that one agent, okay, if I have multiple requests coming to one agent, I can start more agents, but less sessions. So now there's less chance of contention. But if you follow that out to its ultimate conclusion, you're now going back to classic web speed. You would have one agent, one session per agent. You would now see no OS command overhead, no OS command contention, but you're now running classic web speed or classic AppServer underneath PaaS.
That was a super thorough answer.
That would fix it.
All right. Well, we're going to keep moving along here. So this is going back to some of your earlier conversation about session managed connections. Where does it store or maintain the state of the session? This one's for Dan.
So an ABL session that runs in your PaaS multi-session agent will keep that data, right? So I have a session, I have a state and a store of data in there, and it is just kept in that session. That session won't be used by anyone else. The next time that person connects, even though it's HTTPS, the next time that person connects, they'll get that session back, and that will allow them to get back to their stored information. So you might, in that situation, you may have 100 ABL sessions, but 50 of them might be reserved for the next time this customer comes in. And 50 may be able to handle your typical state-free type connections, right? So that's something, if you're doing that, you want to make sure that you have room for all of the people that are going to be doing persistent session requests, and enough sessions for anybody that's going to be doing, the non-persistent requests.
And if there's context on a session, right, where would it be stored in between? Is that on the HTTP session context inside of Tomcat?
Yeah, it depends on where they're keeping it, right? The ABL stuff will be kept there, but that information would be kept in Tomcat and go back and forth with the cookies, right?
Right.
So usually the cookies. I don't want to say it's just the cookies. So.
Right. It's not in the cookie. The cookie is just a pointer back to the HTTP session,
right?
In context inside of Tomcat. But an interesting conversation here is also, what type of application are you running? If you're running just a typical client server app server application where you've got your ABL client or open clients, be very, very mindful about how your application expects to run with the target app server, in this case being PaaS. Very often I've seen people say, well, we use a state-free only, or session-free, I guess, in this world, session-free only connection. Yet, when we look at the logs, when we look at the output of what PaaS is doing, we see that their application, their client application, is actually generating tons of stateful requests. It's actually invoking state on the server side. So be aware of how your application works also.
All right.
And Dan asked another question here, which I think follows up. If you don't mind me stepping in, Joelle.
Yeah. Glad you saw it.
He also says that with a session managed, when the message is done or disconnected, the session is disconnected, the memory should be released, right? And it is released for that ABL session, and it may be released for the operating system, but it probably won't be. The operating system, once it gets memory, does not like to release it. The only
Right.
way to guarantee you're going to get system memory back is to recycle that agent, which means to stop the agent and have it move to another agent. And I think Will had a comment here. What's the right order to do
The
this
right
in, right?
order. Yep. I was going to
Right.
follow up
The
with
right
that
order.
one. Perfect.
The right order is to start a new one if you don't have a new one, and then drain the old one, right? So that way you automatically have an agent waiting to take requests, so your clients don't see any difference, right? You should be able to do this all day long. If you're having a memory leak, you should be able to trim that agent, have another agent available. I always recommend having an extra agent, right? So if you're running with one agent, make sure you have an extra agent. If you're running with 5 agents, at least have 6 agents, right? So there's always an agent out there. If you have to trim an agent, you don't have to add one. And then make sure your minimum number is the same. So as soon as you trim one and you add and you use the other one, the next request will add another one. So there's ways to make sure, again, your system stays up and running. But again, definitely have another agent before you trim that one or stop that one is how the command is.
Add-on question to that. This is from
Uh-huh.
Neil. So I'm trying to keep the theme going here. So we're still talking about agents. Will PaaS-OE support COM objects in the multi-session agent? Currently, you have to stick to 1 session per agent because of the error co-initialize that has not been called. What do you know about that?
I have no relationship with engineering like you do, Roy, so you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is engineering. I can follow up on this. I do not know about this problem, so
Okay.
I have not heard about
So
it. So
could be like a one-off kind of thing.
Only comment I
right,
can make on it. Right. Yeah. The only comment I can make on it is because it's multi-session, multi-threaded, anything you do in the inside of that space needs to be thread safe. If your COM objects or your COM communication can be made thread safe, your mileage might vary better. But I would defer to somebody who understands the inner workings a little better than I do.
right, and there are settings you can add to say this is not thread safe, so don't use the threading. I don't know how well they work. Definitely something to test if that helps you with this, and if not, I would put a bug in, or at least an enhancement request.
Great idea. All right, so we're going to move away from agents. Mike's question, I'm going to do my best to summarize here. Can you speak about performance tuning for PaaS? The situation is that they're migrating from 11.7 web speed going over to 12.8 PaaS web transport. And what should we monitor and what PaaS settings should we consider tweaking for the best performance for their application?
I can field that one, Roy, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I spend a lot of time on the web transport working in PaaS. In fact, I rarely talk about the AppServer transport. I'm more of a web speed guy. As far as performance tuning, there's the typical suspects, right? Number of agents, number of sessions per agent. But what you'll find is that the selection algorithm for the next thread, for the next agent, for the next session that's available is slightly different than it was back in classic days, where it used to go to the next available session or the next available agent. In PaaS, what's going to happen is it's going to find the first available session, which means you might run one agent with 5, 10, 100 sessions on it, but if your requests, let's just say, are serialized, only that first session is going to get any activity. Why you would want to have 200 sessions per agent or 2 agents with 100 apiece, something like that, is to deal with max concurrency. When you're calculating out and you're looking at how many agents do I need, how many sessions per agent do I need, what you're looking for is how many concurrent requests can I take from the website down to PaaS. So what I would advise is look at your existing web server logs, parse them out by date stamp, by URI, by date stamp, something like that, and see how many try to get a metric on how many am I requesting at the same time, or within a small timeout value of plus or minus on either side of that. That's the number you're looking for max concurrency. And as far as monitoring, what should you look at? Well, right there, number one, because not only do you have your web server logs, and Tomcat is a web server, you have all the best tools to parse that log. So that's a very easy drop. Tomcat itself has a lot of metrics just for how many requests has this servlet taken, how many failed, how many passed, what kind of time, as well as PaaS components themselves can also report back. This web transport web app took this many requests and whatever. So start at the easy stuff and easy to get at. Is there anything that somebody else or something else somebody would want to look at, Roy?
Well, yeah, thank you. I look at monitoring not as the log so much, but as the JMX, right? So the REST APIs, I would look at how many requests am I getting? I would look at, you can actually look at the requests in the sessions. So when I'm querying it, how many sessions are busy? How many are idle? How many are in a wait state? You can get all that very quickly with the REST API. The REST API is available to you with a Swagger documentation where you can go in and look at it. You can test it through a GUI application, and then it'll give you the curl command. So from then on, you can use the curl command and gather this data. So that's what I'd also be looking for clients, right? A lot of times I had a situation recently where the customer said their app server was shutting down, but they had plenty of sessions available. It's because their clients were sticking, and they had thousands of clients, right? So even though the agent was available, the client stack had filled up the whole table, right? So
right, and that sounds like an app server type environment, not a web.
Yeah, correct. But but it's important to know that, right? How many agents do you have? How many sessions do you have? What are the maxes, like you mentioned? Making sure the clients aren't sticking anywhere in PaaS-OE or in the broker, and then you can look at how long requests are taking, right? When you go look at the session metrics for an agent in every session, and you can look for long-running ones, because that's important. If you're getting long-running applications, that slows you down for everything else. So those are the ones I would look at.
And I would like to just address that last point, the long running, one of the, especially underneath the app server transport, we mentioned the trimming of agents as maybe it's something that you don't want to do as a modern within your modern platform. Another use case that doesn't necessarily fit this short-lived HTTP request style is using an app server for, say, reporting. I'll just throw things over on the app server asynchronous and let them run for 5-10 minutes. Well, that client is going to throw it over to the app server and then effectively disconnect. There is no more wire. You're not waiting on that response to come back. So it's something that you really want to look at, is how am I using the app server protocol underneath PaaS?
Okay. Now I'm going to throw you guys in a completely different direction. Peter would like to know, what about CI/CD pipeline deployments? What to build, test, and deploy pipeline? What would you choose?
As far as tools go?
They didn't say, Peter didn't say specifically. So we can just kind of talk to this as a whole.
Sure. Well, the usual suspects, right? If we go bottom up, if I want to automate just building my application, whether that's Gradle using the OEDF or Ant with configuring an XML, and you would end up calling the PCT libraries, you compile and package your application. Now what I need to do...
I got some clarification here.
Yeah.
Tools plus way of working. Thank you, Peter.
Right. So from the bottom up again, right? You choose how I want to automate my builds. And it doesn't have to be with OEDF and Gradle or PCT and Ant. You can have just a bash shell script that just says, hey, here it is, run the OpenEdge compiler. However, configuring versus developing how you build your applications is always a little bit less effort, a little bit less work, a little more flexible. But as you work your way up, now I want to be able to automate that process. Now that it's there and I can hit F1 and I can hit an Ant build or an OEDF Gradle build, now I need to automate that. Again, tool of choice, whatever you like. However, one of the most common tools, Jenkins. Not only can I automate Jenkins to say, run this build all the time or on a schedule, but I can say anytime my SCM changes, because we're all using source control this day and age, right? Whenever that changes, just periodically monitor or do some kind of a callback or a hook. So now Jenkins does its build, plus I can distribute that artifact, whatever comes out of there, that's our code. I can now push it over to another remote system. When you push that application update to a PaaS application, you can build a new PaaS instance, put the code underneath, reconfigure however you want. And because, and here, Roy, my favorite word, right? Reverse proxy load balancing, because everybody's doing that, you would have a load balancer or a reverse proxy in front of your PaaS instances. Now I can reconfigure that load balancer to go, instead of A, go to B, right? A, B pattern or blue-green deployments. I can now spin up that PaaS instance, put all my code, reconfigure. I can even do last mile checks. Is it going to work? Yeah, it's going to work. Reconfigure the load balancer to go to B, tear down A. So that life cycle is what a typical CI/CD pattern looks like. And as far as tooling goes, it's your needs here. For my money, it's I don't want to reinvent that particular wheel. So I'm going to find something that I can borderline copy and paste, / all I have to do is reconfigure and it does what I need. I think it begins and ends with your understanding of your application deployment.
Chad, stick with that load balancer comment, because a question came in specifically about that. This is from Bart. We currently use a load balancer to balance traffic between multiple web servers that each host a PaaS OE. Is this not advised? What's the best practice? I think you kind of just talked about that, but can you answer more specifically?
As Roy can attest, that's one of my favorite things to talk about, is not just load balancing.
Oh no, we're going to be here forever.
Reverse. I'll try to keep it abbreviated here. I'll give you the cliff notes. But yes, the answer is short answer is yes. But it comes in two flavors, right? Load balancing and reverse proxy. By far, reverse proxy is borderline a requirement when you're migrating from classic to modern PaaS. You have to have a reverse proxy. That could be Nginx, and all it says is look, when I see APSV calls, pick one of my PaaS instances. Great. Now you've got load balancing, failover, AB pattern style deployments, all because you did that. Secondarily, if you're coming from web speed, maybe your clients have bookmarks, maybe your HTML code has the messenger in the URL, cgip.exe, wservice equals. Well, that doesn't apply anymore inside of PaaS. Well, if I have a reverse proxy in place, when I see a link like that or an access like that coming to my reverse proxy, I can rewrite it. I can say, no, we don't use messenger anymore. Strip that off the URL and do a traditional or a PaaS web transport call. So it's so much flexibility, so much power. And additionally, if I said, hey, why don't you go out and configure your PaaS for SSL because you really should be doing that day one? Okay, I've got to learn SSL, TLS, all these things. Not hard, not painful, or shouldn't be overly painful. But doing it around Tomcat can get a little finicky and a lot of moving parts. All right, worst case, do the same task, but put it into Nginx. It's 3 lines of configuration after you have the certificate. What do you think, Roy? Did I cover it?
And I just have a couple others. Even if you're not running multiple Tomcats with a load balancer, you can still you can make an update to your application, add that into the load balancer, and then take the other one out, right? So you can use this for your CI/CD without any problem at all, even if you're not using it. And having the load balancer with the reverse proxy protects you. It doesn't give away your IP addresses on the inside. So my answer is yes. Even if you're using one PaaS OE at a time, my answer is yes, 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 yes.
Right, especially if you came from the web speed side, right? And you have to do the URL rewrite. Okay, great, reverse proxy. And then as you go out to the perimeter, right, the periphery of your network and of your services, now we can talk network load balancing, F5, NetScaler. I like to let them do what they do best. And they shouldn't have any intimate knowledge with PaaS. So for my money, I like to install my PaaS instances on Linux VM, and then I'm going to put an Nginx on that same box. The only ports I'm going to open up on that firewall are 80 and 443. So now my network load balancer only needs to go here to hit PaaS on port 443. they don't need to know. The network load balancing and scaling doesn't need to know the intimate details of which ports on which PaaS instances. If I own that from an application point of view, I'm now super flexible.
Great. Okay. I think this is going to be a Roy question. So
Uh-oh.
Ayrton, Ayrton has a specific question, but I'm hoping you could also generalize it. Question is, can you name some good practices to monitor CPU usage on PaaS-OE with JMX?
So JMX runs inside a Tomcat, and it gathers beans, so information that's building up in Tomcat. So there is no way using the JMX beans that are in Tomcat to get to the CPU. However, I've talked about the health scanner. The health scanner, which is really easy, you turn it on, you say either turn it on and you say either make it available on the web, it will start gathering that information for you right away. You can gather that information either with a REST API call, or you can gather that information with a script on your system, and it'll give you that information on your CPU. It'll give you CPU, it'll give you memory, it'll give you memory inside the Tomcat. It'll give you how much swap you have. So if you're asking for system questions, turn on the health scanner. And if you have questions, let us know.
All right. So there are so many more questions. I know we are not going to get through them in this webinar session alone. So thank you to everyone who has given us questions. Apologies to those who we were not able to get to. I really want to use the rest of the time, now that you've heard all of these questions that people have and you kind of are probably identifying some themes throughout them. Is there any parting words, Roy, Chad, that you'd like to give the group? You know, I've heard you're concerned about X, consider Y, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Chad.
Yeah. So there's power in planning. Don't expect it to work. Expect it to fail. Plan, plan, plan. And one of those plans is testing. But don't just test your application by going click, run, it worked. Test it at scale. Test it as if it's in production and there's 500 users. And then once you're done testing, check your tests, make sure they work everywhere, and then check your security and then test security. Also, check how you work on things. Am I writing scripts around WTB man, ASB man? Well, now those don't exist. How am I supposed to monitor, maintain all my instances? But do all that up front.
We must have timed him out. That'll teach him.
Oh, no. Well, it's live theater, folks.
There we go. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, are you there, Chad? I hear you, but
yeah.
I don't see you.
Okay, I don't
you're
know.
Still there.
Everything broke.
That's okay.
So I love everything that that Chad was saying. My biggest thing was stop treating PaaS-OE like the Classic AppServer. All those things you learn that work with the Classic AppServer, all those things, I'm sorry, it's not the same. And you just need to spend the time, one, to learn it, one, to get used to the log files, two, to start monitoring it. And then remember, we have been improving it. So if you're on 11.7, if you're on 12.2, 12.8 works much better, has many more tools, has many more security fixes, upgrade and monitor and understand it's different. And I think if you do that, because the nice thing is you're going to compile your code and it's going to work on PaaS-OE almost 9 times out of 10. That doesn't mean it's going to run in production as well, right? So you need to have these things in place, as Chad was saying. So those are my final thoughts.
Yeah, think about it early, do it often and early. So if you're going to have a problem, if you're going to be secure, which we all should be, do it early. Switch all your passwords. Let's go to TLS. Let's test load balancing. Let's do all these things up front and early. Shift left in your development process. There was also a question, Joel, in the questions about Nagios. Can we use Nagios and components to monitor? Absolutely, yes. Right? If you Googled for, hey, Tomcat throughput monitoring or whatever, it's all applicable.
Right. I did Nagios 10 years ago with Pazooie,
Yeah.
and it's gotten so much better.
Yeah, I like
right?
nachos
So
too, you guys.
yeah, especially with that cheese on top. So,
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really great session. I think people have, looking at the comments, people have really appreciated how in depth you've gone with your answers. So we'll definitely have to do some more of these again. Back at the beginning, I had said that we'll get to all the questions that we weren't able to answer here on this call. We'll definitely be shooting you a message so you get an answer from us. So thank you, Chad. Thank you, Roy, for your thoughts, your presentation, answering
one
all of
more
these
thing.
questions coming from every direction. It was really great.
It's fun.
And thank you, everyone, for being here.
All right.
Thanks
All
for having
right.
us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.